Hi, I'm Shao. In today's discussion, I am going to open a can of worms. So I have to tread carefully in order to keep the discussion as fact-based and as objective as possible, without stressing too much opinion into it. Let's start at the beginning. Film is quite a tolerant medium, light-sensitive medium, because the light-sensitive layer, which is made of silver nitrate granules fixed inside a layer of gelatin, is basically very close to the surface. So film is not really sensitive to the angle of light hitting it. Whatever the angle, the light-sensitive component would be reactive. That allowed the design of interchangeable lens mounts to be quite flexible. The flange distance, or the distance between the rear element of the lens and the film, was only dependent on the type of camera. Rangefinder cameras that had nothing between the lens and the film could have a short flange distance, which has which is a great advantage when talking about wide-angle lenses. Now, with SLRs, there was a mirror mechanism in the middle between the lens and the light-sensitive medium. So the mount had to account for that. And flange distance had to be longer, greater, in order to allow the mirror to flip. So wide-angle lenses had to have a special optical design that is retrofocal, where the convergence of the light rays was behind the lens. With the shift to digital photography, light angle became an issue, a constraint. You see, the photodiodes, which function as the light harvesting components in the sensor, are slightly buried inside the silicon layer, and there are raised walls between them, which contain the electronics and prevent light from leaking from one photodiode to the other, to the next one, in order to optimize the performance of sensor, which is, by the way, an analog device, but it creates a digital image through conversion of the charge stored by the photodiodes into numbers. But anyway, in order for the photodiode to maximize light harvesting, the light had to hit it straight on. Or, in other words, light rays have to be perpendicular to the surface of the sensor. And that proved quite a challenge with the old mounts, especially with rangefinder mounts. The angle between the edge of the rear element and the sensor's edge, in fact the sensor's corner in the Leica E-mount is quite sharp. It's actually about 82 to 83 degrees, which did not allow the light to be as efficient as it could be when hitting the sensor. And this is why in the first Leica M digital cameras, there were some issues with color representation and with a lot of vignetting and softness around the edges. This case was also true for some of the SLR mounts, especially for the Nikon F-mount, which had quite a narrow throat. But the long distance, the long flange distance, compensated for that. It allowed the angle of the light to be closer to 90 degrees. It was actually around 85 to 86 degrees. So that was close enough to perpendicular in order to really minimize those effects of vignetting and edge softness. There was one system at the time designed for digital imaging from scratch, which was the 4/3 system. That system used a smaller sensor with a diagonal of only around 21.5 millimeters compared to 43 millimeters, which is the diagonal of full frame, or 36 by 24 millimeter sensor. And 4/3 used quite a wide mount for it. The light rays were designed to really hit the sensor at a 90 degrees angle, or very close to it. And it proved to have some serious benefits compared to other mounts. Images were sharp from corner to corner. There was very little vignetting, depending on the lens, but even the zooms made for that system performed very well. Curiously, the Canon EF mount also had similar properties. It had a much wider mount than other SLR mounts, and it proved to have some benefits. Lenses made for the Canon mount could be wider in their aperture, and they performed quite well compared to Nikon, for example, which had only a narrower mouth, 44mm compared to 54 for the Canon EF. Leica tackled the issue of sharp light angles by a solution that was quite ingenious. In front of the sensor there is a layer of micro-lenses which concentrate the light onto the surface of the photodiode. Back then, about half of the area of the sensor, or even more, was dedicated to those walls between pixels, but also to electronics, to wiring and amplifiers and different electronic components. So you needed a micro lens in order to take that light that hit the sensor and focus it onto the light harvesting component, which is the photodiode itself. By offsetting those micro lenses close to the edge of the sensor, Leica could make a better use of the light. It could capture the light coming in at an angle and still direct it to the photodiode. That solution proved to prevent those early issues Leica cameras suffered from. When mirrorless was introduced in 2008, it of course demanded the design of new mounts. And all the mounts created accounted for that issue of light angle. So what you got was quite wide diameter mounts with a short flange distance, which still allowed for a perpendicular light transmission onto the sensor, or very close to perpendicular. All the mounts created between 2008 and 2010 accounted for this. Those were the micro four thirds, which replaced four thirds, the Fuji X mount, Samsung's NX mount, and Sony's E-mount. They all had a relatively small sensor, mostly APS-C, but the width of the mount was wide enough to accommodate a perpendicular transfer of light. In 2013, Sony introduced the EF mount, which was identical to the E-mount in its design, but it hosted a full-frame sensor, which is a lot larger than the APS-C sensor the mount was designed for. That really limited the efficiency of light harvesting in that mount. Sony utilized the microlens offset solution, first introduced with Leica M-mount cameras, but still it constrained the system unnecessarily, I think. However, the E-mount was a new one. It was only designed a few years before, and I believe Sony had a strong motivation of refraining from introducing another new mount in order to accommodate a full frame sensor in it. The EF mount introduced an angle of around 82 degrees between the rear of the lens and the corner of the sensor, which is quite an acute angle. Sony tried to tackle that through increasing the effective flange distance. All the early lenses made for this mount had a sort of an adapter welded onto the rear of the lens. So in effect, the flange distance was much longer, and the angle between the edge of the lens and the edge of the sensor was more akin to an SLR system. Wide-angle lenses had to be retrofocal, despite the lack of a mirror between the lens and the sensor. So those wide-angle lenses were quite large. Later on, at around 2016, Sony came up with perhaps a better solution that allowed the lenses to be made a lot smaller. And it was introduced mainly in the GM, Sony's high-end lenses. That solution included a special type of aspherical element that was made with very tight tolerances and was characterized by a massive difference between the thickness of glass between the middle of the center of the element and its edges. The edges were much fatter than the middle, and the whole element looked like a flat disc with raised rims. Those special aspherical elements allowed for a very acute angle of light. But that light was still well concentrated onto the sensor, preventing too much dispersion. They also tackled the issue of field curvature, which is inherent in cases of sharp light angles hitting the edge of the sensor. In my opinion, those special spherical elements cannot be made out of any type of glass. They must be made of polymer or plastic, which is easier to mold at very tight tolerances. They also have a very fine surface that prevents onion rings in the bouquet. And that is another issue which is typical to spherical glass elements. I believe that the polymer material used in those elements is resistant to light dispersion because they have to be. It's a system with a very tight tolerance. It has to be very precise in its light transmission. So that could contribute to the rather flat appearance of Sony GM lenses. It plagues that system. The Sony E-mount is not inherently flat. You can still make nice, more dimensional lenses to be mounted on it. But those lenses have to be longer. They have to allow more space between the rear element and the sensor. So those lenses are quite long for what they are, for their focal length and for their maximum aperture. Another constraint which is built into the Sony E-mount is the very tight distance requirement between the rear of the lens and the sensor. You cannot really move the rear group in any of those lenses. They have to be fixed in place in order to project the light at the very accurate angle they are designed for. And that creates an issue of focus breathing. You see, the field of view is controlled by the distances between different groups in the lens. When you focus, usually the front element is the front group in the lens is fixed. There is a middle group that moves forward and backwards to achieve focus at different subject distances, and ideally the rear group or part of it can also move in order to accommodate for the field of view. The distance between the middle group and the rear group has to be fixed in order to transmit the same amount of light. If the this distance is increased, only the central part of the light transmitted by the middle group hits the rear group, and the focal length is increased as a result. When you cannot move the rear group, every time you focus, the effective field of view will change, and what you will get is focus breathing, which is very hard to get rid of, especially in normal and wider field of views. At around 2018, there were 3 other mirrorless mounts introduced: the L-mount, the Canon RF mount, and the Nikon Z-mount. All those mounts were designed for full-frame sensors, so their width was large enough in order to accommodate such a sensor while preserving a perpendicular light transmission. All 3 of those new mounts had a sound design, except perhaps the L mount is quite tight. The Nikon and Canon mounts were certainly wide enough to allow for a perpendicular transfer of light. And this gives those manufacturers an advantage over Sony, because the lenses they design can have more degrees of freedom. They can completely avoid focus breathing, for example, by moving both rear and center groups while focusing. Although the lenses have to be quite a bit larger in order to allow for those synchronized movements. In both those mounts, you can avoid the difficulties of dealing with sharp incident angles of light. And you do not need to offset any micro lenses. You do not need any radical aspherical elements in order to avoid field curvature. Moreover, the very well controlled angles of light mean that the transition from sharpness to unsharpness in the images, or sharpness fall off, can be more gradual. You don't have those fast loss of sharpness. Depth of field, while being dependent only on the physical aperture of the lens, seems to be a little bit thicker or wider in lenses made for those systems. However, the Sony E-mount, being the oldest full-frame mirrorless mount by a long way, and by being an open mount, third-party manufacturers are invited to create lenses for this mount, has become the industry standard. as flawed as it may be. So all third-party lenses are designed to accommodate for the limitations of this mount. And they are optimized for the Sony E-mount. Now, when you mount a lens that is made with an acute light angle in mind, on a system that does not need that consideration, you do not optimize the lens to the mount. It is well known that mounting a third-party lens on a Nikon camera creates more vignetting and maybe a little bit of blurrier edges than when mounting the same lens on a Sony camera. And that is because those lenses take into consideration the offset micro lenses that are not present in the Nikon Z mount. I suspect that this is one of the reasons why Canon is reluctant of allowing third-party manufacturers making autofocus lenses for its RF mount. Those lenses simply do not optimize the system, unlike lenses created by Canon, which are of course made for the RF mount. And how much does it matter? Well, it doesn't matter to me, not at all. I rarely look at corner sharpness. Vignetting doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I find it quite pleasing when the edges of the frame are quite darker than its center. I'm not bothered by focus breathing either, because I don't shoot much video. The lens shooting me now is a manual focus lens mounted on an autofocusing adapter. So what happens in effect when I change the focal distance is the whole lens moves in respect to the sensor. In effect, the rear group in the lens is the one that controls the focus. I'll show you what happens when I get nearer to the camera. As you can see, there is a strong focus breathing effect. As I get nearer to the camera, the field of view becomes narrower, but it doesn't bother me in my shooting experience. However, it might bother you, especially if you do landscape or reproduction or other types of critical photography. In that case, you want the whole area of the frame to be equally sharp. You do not want any field curvature to affect the rendering of the scene. And you do not want too much vignetting. Focus breathing might concern you if you shoot a lot of video. I can tell you Sony had to introduce focus breathing compensation into its camera, changing the effective resolution of its sensor by cropping in and out while changing focus. Please let me know what you think about those issues. Do you use third-party lenses made for mirrorless on a non-Sony camera? How much does those inaccuracies in image rendition, mainly along the edges of a frame, mainly with wide-angle lenses, disturb you? Right, that will be all for today. If you like this video, if you like my channel more generally, please consider buying me a coffee. It really helps. So until next time, goodbye.